Good morning, everyone. My name is Russell Rucker. I'm here for another constitutional talk. Today I thought we'd go back in the convention. We'll talk about the people that attended a little bit more. All the signers are in the back section of my book, Textualism. So if you have a copy of that, it actually goes through a brief review of their life, of what they accomplished and what they thought while they were serving in the convention. Now, I just thought we'd go through some of these to begin with to give you an idea. Let's start here with George Reed up in the corner, and then we move to Richard Bassett. And then down here, and then you have James Wilson up here, who became a Supreme Court justice. And then we move down to an important founder, Robert Morris. Robert Morris really was one of our most important founders. He gave a lot to the Republic, especially fighting for independence. He was the financier of the Revolution. George Washington, who is up here, actually wanted to appoint him as Secretary of the Treasury, but he said no, and he gave Hamilton's name. And Hamilton is over in our second panel in the your lower left corner. Daniel of St. Thomas Genevieve, he's one of the aging statesmen. The other aging statesman is in panel 2, who is Benjamin Franklin. Then you have the president of the convention, George Washington. And following George Washington, you have Richard Dobbs Speight, who is signing. Now, he's famous for a duel in which he died in the 4th round down in the Carolinas. Then, beginning in the panel, standing, second panel, you have William Blount. And from William Blount, we go down to David Brearley, who is seated. You can only see his forehead. And then from there, you have Mr. Broome, Jacob Broome. Then you have John Dickinson next to him. Now, John Dickinson, he's famous for fighting taxation. He wrote letters from a farmer in Pennsylvania. After the Stamp Act was defeated, he was working on getting rid of the Intolerable Acts. Below him is seated is Gunning Bedford Jr. over here. Then we get up standing. You have William Hugh. Then with his hands upraised like this, you have the Secretary of the Convention. He's actually not a delegate. He's the only one here that's not a delegate, but he is a signer. And that's William H. Jackson. He was elected by this body to serve over Franklin's nephew, to serve as secretary. Then inside his arm, you have William Patterson. Now, William Patterson wrote up the New Jersey plan and had it presented. And from there, working across, we have John Blair, John Langdon, and then in the far corner of panel 2, we have Gouverneur Morris. Now, Gouverneur Morris, he wrote the preamble to the Constitution. He was the head of the Committee on Style and Arrangement. Below him, seated, you have Alexander Hamilton, which I mentioned. He was our first Secretary of the Treasury. Then next to him, you have Benjamin Franklin. I don't really think he needs any real introduction, but he was a scientist. He's famous for the Kaitaki experiment. He discovered lead in the drinking water. He also was an inventor. He invented the Franklin stove, bifocals, the lightning rod, and it just goes on and on. He was a major diplomat for a while, and he was even in charge of dealing with the Penn estates in Pennsylvania. The Penn family owned at one time 2/3 of the state of Pennsylvania. So then we move on into panel 3. And as you look at panel 3, bent kind of over in what would be your right side, you have William Livingston. And working across, you have Thomas Mifflin, James McHenry. There are many of these you can't hardly see because the arms. Nicholas Gilman, Thomas Fitzsimmons, and Pierce Butler. Ends up just before the man with the outstretched arms. Now below that group is seated, you have Jared Ingersoll, William Samuel Johnson, and Roger Sherman. Then we get to the Pickneys. You have William Coates Pickney, which is the first in front with his arm outstretched towards Washington. That's William's Coates Pickney. Next to him is that's Charles Coates Pickney. My mistake. And next to him is Charles Pickney. Now, Charles Pickney, he wrote the Pickney Plan. Now, all these plans that I've mentioned here have been talked about earlier, in earlier talks. Oh, and I think when we were in panel 2, I think I missed James Madison here between Franklin and William Blount. Excuse me, not William Blount, William Hugh. So that was a very important man. But back to past the Pickneys there. You have you have John Rutledge. So past the Pickneys, you have John Rutledge, William Few, Abraham Baldwin, and David Carroll. And that takes care of those that are standing. So we're left with 3. We have 3 delegates left here. What you have is Nathaniel Gorham seated in the far corner of panel 3. And then you have Jonathan Dayton next to him seating. Now, what's important about Jonathan Dayton is he actually has a city named after him. Dayton, Ohio, is named after him. He is an important founder, and pretty much all these men are important founders. But next to him is Rufus King. Now, Rufus King has the depiction of being the last Federalist that they ever got to run for president. So he was the final presidential candidate for the Federalist Party, and he was an important Federalist. In fact, during Washington's administration, Alexander Hamilton was complaining to him that he thought this just attacks against him that were actually brought on through Jefferson would never end. And you had a big feud inside Washington's administration for the reason of basically Hamilton wanted to turn it from an agrarian or agricultural society to a more of a mercantile society. And of course, the southern states were all involved in cotton, tobacco, wheat, farm kind of sources of income. So they were really worried about that. And Jefferson saw the Federalists as traitors for that reason. And of course, the Federalists didn't think much of Jefferson and his Republican followers. They were trying to hold on to power. The Federalists really held a lot of power in the courts. In fact, when you get over to Wilson here, he was a justice in the Supreme Court. William Patterson served in the court up there in between, in the outstretched arms of Secretary Jackson. Now, the other interesting thing when you get to where we were discussing Rufus King and two overseated the Nathan Gorham. See, Washington would open up the meetings, and then he would step aside. But Nathan Gorham was the chairman of the committee of the whole, the committee of everyone, the whole group, all 55 men. Of course, here's only 40 that signed, so there's only 40 pictured here. So he would run most of the meeting because Washington would step aside every morning. You know, he would open up the convention. He would talk about news of the day, the State of the Union, and then he would step aside and Nathaniel Gorham would have to run the meeting. And that's what this is. The Constitutional Convention is a meeting of states. Each state had one vote. This cannot be emphasized any more importantly. Because you see, during the Continental Congresses and even the Congress of the Confederation, each state only had one vote. You didn't have vote by representation. And we'll probably get into that in our next talk on the convention. And we get into the Great Compromise, just to let you know how we're rolling forward here. But I thought what we should start with here is go through these people and let you understand exactly who's here and kind of why, you know. And St. Thomas of Genevieve here, and the second panel, Benjamin Franklin. Those are your aging statements. They're elderly men. I mean, Washington's in his 80s. The average age is 43 of all these men. So if you remove St. Thomas of Genevieve and or Daniel St. Thomas of Genevieve, and you remove Benjamin Franklin, that number goes down quite a bit. Many of these people are just in their 30s. They aren't aging old men like some want to say today. They were young men. They were in their 30s. And a lot of people would point to your lifespan back then was shorter. But that's when you compare, that's because you compare the lifespan of everyone, and one, the lifespan greatly changes once you reached adulthood. It's not that much different than it is today. What we've gained on is we've ended a lot of youth deaths. We've ended a lot of deaths because of pregnancy, because we understand how pregnancy works a little bit better. You have doctors achieving, you have C-sections, you have all these things, and plenty of drugs that help. So women generally survive childbirth today. And when you get back in the era we're talking about, a lot of women died in childbirth. They'd have 4 or 5 kids, you'd have a complication, and the mother would not survive. And that happened routinely. It wasn't just an oddball thing. So when you remove the child infancy death, the smallpox problems, and all these kind of things, your lifespan really wasn't that great a difference once you reached adulthood. So the idea that these men were old just isn't true. Yes, Franklin and Daniel St. Thomas of Genevieve, they were old, aging statesmen. And but they were active. Benjamin Franklin would write speeches, and he would ask others to read it in lots of cases. He actually had to be carried into the convention on a device, basically a chair with 2 long rods, because he suffered so badly from gout. In fact, the first day of the convention, he was absent for sickness. But he was virtually always there. Now, Franklin actually made a comment about the importance of all the men here, said this was the greatest gathering that he'd ever been a part of. And prior to the actual meeting taking place, because there were people there and not enough people from the different states, he even had a dinner party one afternoon. He opened up a keg of port, and they drank their beer, and had a little dinner party there. And so he was really active with these people, mingling with these people, debating and discussing things. It's not, as some would say, that he was there, but he really wasn't active. He was active. He was active more than most, but he was nowhere near the most active. In fact, when you get over in the third panel into Charles Pinckney coats, and then Charles Pinckney there, who was in the colorful coat, he's known as Constitutional Charlie. Basically, because he just wouldn't shut up. He talked about every darn subject. He constantly appeared and rose and discussed. And that's just the nature of this convention. Now, I just thought we'd go through the men for a couple minutes to give you a better idea. So as we roll into some of the characters and what's occurring here, you might get a better idea. And so I'll wrap up for now, and we'll see you next week on the next Constitutional Talk. I hope you're getting something out of my talks. If you're new, please subscribe to my videos. It's important. It helps me a lot. And keep in mind, I do have a couple books out, Textualism and Originalism in Our Constitutional Republic. It goes through the Constitution line by line, and at the end, there is a write-up on every one of the signers, so you get a little better idea. I did not put a write-up of the 3 that didn't sign. But with that, it helps you a little. Our founders and their words and why they matter. This is also about the Constitution, but it's kind of about history. It gives you an idea of what they were thinking, where they were going, and it gives you a little bit of better understanding of our Constitution, which is what I'm trying to achieve. So thank you for your time. I'll catch you next time on the next Constitutional Talk. And have a good day now.